finish. I'll finish it later. A librarian named Miss Truman Ritchie snatched me from the jaws of ruin, and it's too late now to thank her. I'm not the first person to notice that we rarely get around to thanking those who've helped us the most. Salvation is such a heady thing. The temptation is to dance gasping on the shore, shouting that we are alive till our forgotten Savior has long since gone under. Or else sit quietly, sideswiped and embarrassed, mumbling that we really did know pretty much how to swim. But now that I see the wreck that could have been without Miss Ritchie, I'm of a fearsome mind to throw my arms around every living librarian who crosses my path on behalf of the souls they never knew they saved. I reached high school at the close of the 60s in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, whose ranking on educational spending was, I think, around 51st, after Mississippi and whatever was below Mississippi. Recently, Kentucky had drastically changed the way money is spent on its schools, but back then the wealth of the county decreed the wealth of the school, and few coins fell far from the money trees that grew in Lexington. Our county, out where the bluegrass begins to turn brown, was just scraping by. Many a dedicated teacher served out earnest missions in our halls, but it was hard to spin silk purses out of a sow's ear budget. We didn't get anything fancy like Latin or calculus. Apart from English, the only two courses of study that ran for 4 consecutive years, each one building upon the last, were segregated: home ec for girls and shop for boys. And so I stand today, a woman who knows how to upholster, color coordinate a table setting, and plan a traditional wedding. Valuable skills I'm still waiting to put to good use in my life. As far as I could see from the lofty vantage point of age 16, there was nothing required of me at Nicholas County High that was going to keep me off the streets. Unfortunately, we had no streets either. We had lanes, roads, and rural free delivery routes, 6 in number, I think. We had 2 stoplights, which were set to burn green in all directions after 6 p.m., so as not, should the event of traffic arise, to slow anybody up. What we didn't have included almost anything respectable teenagers might do in the way of entertainment. In fact, there was one thing for teenagers to do to entertain themselves, and it was done in the backs of Fords and Chevrolets. It wasn't upholstering skills that were brought to bear on those back seats either, though the wedding planning skills did follow. I found myself beginning a 3rd year of high school in a state of unrest, certain I already knew what there was to know, academically speaking, all wised up and no place to go. Some of my peers used the strategy of rationing out the science and math classes between periods of suspension or childbirth, stretching their schooling over the allotted 4 years, and I envied their broader vision. I had gone right ahead and used the classes up, like a reckless hiker gobbling up all the rations on day 1 of a long march. Now I faced years of study hall, with brief interludes of home ec 3 and 4 as the bright spots. I was developing a lean and hungry outlook. We did have a school library, and a librarian who was surely paid inadequately to do the work she did, yet there she was every afternoon, presiding over the study hall, and she noticed me. For reasons I can't fathom, she discerned potential. I expect she saw my future, or at least the one I craved so hard it must have materialized in the air above me, connected to my head by little cartoon bubbles. If that's the future she saw, it was riding down the road on the back of a motorcycle wearing a black leather jacket with violators. That was the name of our county's motorcycle gang, and I'm not kidding. Stitched in a solemn arc across the back. There is no way on earth I really would have ended up a violator girlfriend. I could only dream of such a thrilling fate. But I was set hard upon wrecking my reputation in the limited ways available to skinny, unsought-after girls. They consisted mainly of cutting up in class, pretending to be surly, and making up shocking, entirely untrue stories about my home life. I wonder now that my parents continued to feed me. I clawed like a cat in a gunny sack against the doom I feared, staying home to reupholster my mother's couch 100,000 weekends in a row until some tolerant, myopic farm boy came along to rescue me from sewing machine slavery. Miss Ritchie had something else in mind. She took me by the arm in study hall one day and said, "Barbara, I'm going to teach you Dewey Decimal. One more valuable skill in my life." She launched me on the project of cataloging and shelving every one of the probably 1,000 books in the Nicholas County High School library. And since it beat home ec 3 by a mile, I spent my study hall hours this way without audible complaint, so long as I could look plenty surly while I did it. Though it was hard to see the real point of organizing books nobody ever looked at. And since it was my God-given duty in those days to be frank as a plank, I said as much to Miss Ritchie. She just smiled. She, with her hidden agenda, And gradually, in the process of handling every book in the room, I made some discoveries. I found Gone with the Wind, which I suspected my mother felt was kind of trashy. And I found Edgar Allan Poe, who scared me witless. I found that the call number for books about snakes is 666. I found William Saroyan's Human Comedy, down there on the shelf between Human Anatomy and Human Physiology, where probably no one had touched it since 1943. But I read it, and it spoke to me. In spite of myself, I imagined the life of an immigrant son who believed human kindness was a tangible and glorious thing. I began to think about words like tangible and glorious. I read on. After I'd read all the good ones, I went back and read Human Anatomy and Human Physiology and found that I liked those pretty well too. It came to pass in 2 short years that the walls of my high school dropped down, and I caught the scent of a world. I started to dream up intoxicating lives for myself that I could not have conceived without the books. So I didn't end up on a motorcycle. I ended up roaring hell for leather down the back roads of transcendent, reeling sentences. A writer. Imagine that. The most important thing about the books I read in my rebellion is that they were not what I expected. I can't say I had no previous experience with literature. I grew up in a house full of books. Also, I had known my way around the town's small library since I was tall enough to reach the shelves, though the town librarian disliked children and censored us fiercely, and looked forward to the bookmobile as hungrily as more urbane children listened for the ice cream truck. So dearly did my parents want their children to love books, they made reading aloud the center of our family life, and when the TV broke, they took about 2 decades to get around to fixing it. It's well known, though, that when humans reach a certain age, they identify precisely what it is their parents want for them and bolt in the opposite direction like lemmings for the cliff. I had already explained to my classmates in an effort to get dates that I was raised by wolves, and I really had to move on from there. If I was going to find a path to adult reading, I had to do it my own way. I had to read things I imagined my parents didn't want me looking into. Trash, like Gone with the Wind. I think now that my mother had no real problem with Gone with the Wind, but wisely didn't let on. Now that I'm a parent myself, I'm sympathetic to the longing for some control over what children read or watch or do. Our protectiveness is a deeply loving and deeply misguided effort to keep our kids inside the bounds of what we know is safe and right. Sure, I want to train my child to goodness, but unless I can invoke amnesia to blot out my own past, I have to see it's impossible to keep her inside the world I came up in. That world rolls on. You can't step in the same river twice. The things that prepared me for life are not the same things that will move my own child into adulthood. And that's a good place to stop today because what snapped me out of my surly adolescence and moved me on were books that let me live other people's lives. I got to visit the Dust Bowl and London and the Civil War and Rhodesia. The fact that Rhett Butler said damn was a snoozer to me. I hardly noticed the words that mothers worried about. I noticed words like color bar spelled color the way Doris Lessing wrote it, and eventually I figured out it meant racism. It was the thing that had forced some of the kids in my county to go to a separate school, which wasn't even a school but a one-room CME church, and grow up without plumbing or the hope of owning a farm. When I picked up Martha Quest, a novel set in southern Africa, it jarred open a door that was right in front of me. I found I couldn't close it. If there is danger in a book like Martha Quest, and the works of all other authors who've been banned at one time or another, the danger is generally that they will broaden our experience and blend us more deeply with our fellow humans. Sometimes this makes waves. It made some at my house. We had a few rocky years while I sorted out new information about the human comedy, the human tragedy, and the ways some people are held to the ground unfairly. I informed my parents that I had invented a new notion called justice. Eventually I learned to tone down my act a little. Miraculously, there were no homicides in the meantime. Now, with my adolescence behind me and my daughters still ahead, I am nearly speechless with gratitude for the endurance and goodwill of librarians in an era that discourages reading in almost incomprehensible ways. We've created for ourselves a culture that undervalues education, compared with the rest of the industrialized world, to say the least, undervalues breadth of experience, compared with our potential, downright discourages critical thinking, judging from what the majority of us watch and read, and distrusts foreign ideas. Un-American, from what I hear, is meant to be an insult. Most alarming to my mind is that we the people tolerate censorship in school libraries for the most bizarre and frivolous of reasons. Art books that contain horrors, nude human beings, And The Wizard of Oz because it has witches in it. Not always, everywhere, but everywhere, always something. And censorship of certain ideas in some quarters is enough to sway curriculums at the national level, sometimes profoundly. Find a publishing house that's brave enough to include a thorough discussion of the principles of evolution in a high school text. Good luck. And yet, just about all working botanists, zoologists, and ecologists will tell you that evolution is to their field what germ theory is to medicine. We expect our kids to salvage a damaged earth, but in deference to the religious beliefs of a handful, we allow an entire generation of future scientists to germinate and grow in a vacuum. The parents who believe in special creation have every right to tell their children how the world was made all at once, of a piece, in the year 4004 BC. Heaven knows I tell my daughter things about economic justice that are just about as far outside the mainstream of American dogma. But I don't expect her school to forgo teaching Western history or capitalist economics on my account. Likewise, it should be the job of special creationist parents to make their story convincing to their children, set against the school's bright scenery of dinosaur fossils and genetic puzzle solving, the crystal clarity of Darwinian logic, the whole glorious science of an evolving world that tells its own creation story. It cannot be any teacher's duty to tiptoe around religion, hiding objects that might raise questions at home. Faith, by definition, is impervious to fact. A belief that can be changed by new information was probably a scientific one, not a religious one, and science derives its value from its openness to revision. If there is a fatal notion on this earth, it's the notion that wider horizons will be fatal. Difficult, troublesome, scary, yes, all that, but the wounds for a sturdy child will not be mortal. When I read Doris Lessing at 17, I was shocked to wake up from my placid colorblind coma into the racially segregated town I called my home. I saw I had been a fatuous participant in a horrible thing. I bit my nails to the quick, cast nets of rage over all I loved for a time, and quaked to think of all I had, still have, to learn. But if I hadn't made that reckoning, I would have lived a smaller, meaner life. The crossing is worth the storm. Ask my parents. 20 years ago, I expect they'd have said, "Here, take this child, we will trade her to you for a sack of limas." But now, they have a special shelf in their house for books that bear the family name on their spines. Slim rewards for a parent's thick volumes of patience, to be sure, but at least there are no motorcycles rusting in the carport. My thanks to Doris Lessing, and William Saroyan, and Miss Truman Ritchie, and every other wise teacher who may ever save a surly soul like mine.